So we've got a star-studded keynote panel, and we're going to kick off with some big picture analysis in terms of what are the key drivers for renewables and carbon reductions for mines. It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Benedetti. Chris is a principal at a leading consultancy, Sussex Strategy Group, and they have global clients in both the renewable energy and mining side. So thank you very much, Chris.
Great. Thank you very much, Adrian, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, and very, very interesting topic. I think a great way to kick off the day's proceedings and, think about all the changes that have happened. Adrian mentioned we're very much involved in the power and utilities space, but have also been very much involved in the mining space over the last number of years. And one of the projects that we've been working on is the connection of remote communities in northwestern Ontario to the provincial grid, and in fact, coming up in a few weeks' time before the holidays, we'll be connecting Pikangikum First Nation to the grid, and that's very, very exciting. And then starting construction on the rest of the Wataynikaneyap Power Project next year, and that's work that really couldn't have happened without the support of Goldcorp. So I think, the symbiotic nature of energy development, particularly in the north with Indigenous communities and mining, is very, very real. In any event, we're joined by a fantastic panel here this morning, and I'm just going to introduce them very, very quickly, and we'll get right into the discussion. Mike Eyre is the Environment Director, Sustainability and External Relations with Newmont, and involved in a number of different projects right around the world. So very happy to have Mike here with us this morning. Ron Miller, who's the Principal Advisor, Energy, Productivity and Technical Support with Rio Tinto. Again, very much involved in the Australian market, but obviously with operations around the world. Benoit Lassalle, Chairman, All Gold Resources, Sama Resources, and SRG Graphite, involved in obviously a variety of different remote operations, but also involved in Canadian IPP in West Africa, focused on renewable projects. And Ralph Shearling, President and Director with the Telson Mining Corporation, involved in Mexico and very much involved in renewables. So, ladies and gentlemen, your panel this morning. So we'll get right into the discussion in terms of, when you look at mining operations integrating renewables, maybe we could go across the panel, and Benoit, perhaps you want to start in terms of how you see that integration happening.
Well, we saw this coming 8 years ago when we were ourselves buying 3 million liters a month of fuel to our mines, and I kept saying, we have to truck it, it's bad quality most of the time anyway, so we have to change all the filters all the time. And I said, let's take some money out of our CSR initiative and create an IPP company and replace these gensets with solar, because we're in Africa, solar would be key. So 8 years ago, we saw it coming. We created our own IPP, which is called Windiga Energy, and we were developing many projects. I would say we have about 300 megawatts in the pipeline for our mines. We built 6 mines already. We have one that just finished, a 7th one, and we have 2 in construction at the moment, and they're all going towards renewable because, in Africa, where you've got a truck sometimes 1,000 kilometer, 3 million liters a month, it was killing me. So we really took a lot of time and money and have created what I believe now is a good solution. And following this morning's opening remark, the governments are putting pressure on us, like big time. The governments are changing. They're all getting younger. They're all educated in North America or Europe, and that's the first thing they talk to us is, what about your energy? What will you do? So, yes, we need to do it, but I can tell you, if we don't think about it, they are thinking about it, and they'll force us. So, but we're ahead of the curve, and we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Ron?
Yeah, well, Rio Tinto is a big energy consumer worldwide. We use about the same amount of energy as the country, the Netherlands. So we are seriously looking at our energy costs first, consumption, and then our emissions. And to address that issue, we've, as Kim mentioned, 9 megawatts of wind at Diavik, along with some other energy storage, hydrogen storage, availability there to help balance out our supply with our demand. Also, we have 1.7 megawatts of solar at our Weipa bauxite mine in Cape York, northeast part of Australia. But I think for our operations, especially in Western Australia, the iron ore, in the Pilbara, where we have excellent irridance opportunities to harness that resource and to generate more energy cheaper and cleaner. I think that's a challenge for our company. And as Kim mentioned, the diesel consumption. I think that's for our a view of the future green mine is to try to address how much diesel we use and the emissions that are inherent with that consumption.
So certainly affordability, a social license and an environmental frame, I think, is something that's common. Ralph, what about your experience?
Well, you know, we're the little guy on the block. We're just a resource company that was an exploration company, just turned into mining. So we have 2 projects in Mexico, and the Mexican government has mandated that any significant company should be going towards 25% green power. So our agreement with a solar energy provider has allowed us to do that. We're also building another mine in a remote area in northwestern Durango, and that would have been diesel power, but we've decided to go to natural gas, so a smaller footprint with that as well. So we're trying to solve a number of different problems, and we're actually saving money from our project in Campo Morado buying the solar power. So all in all, we're making steps towards becoming a small, more greener company.
Mike?
Yeah, is this on? Yeah, so I think the main driver was science-based targets, which align with the Paris Agreement. So we actually did kind of like chart it out to see if we can get to a science-based target in 2030, 2040, 2050. And we realized, we're, energy intensive, so renewable energy has to be part of the portfolio to reduce our emissions. So we have to have big solar plants, not just like 1 or 2 megawatts, but maybe 200, 300 megawatts are in our long-term planning. So that's our long-term planning, but in the short term, we have several opportunities, which, since I'm in the sustainability group, I've been pushing solar for almost a decade. And last year, I got permission to engage in a small solar company called Cambridge Energy Partners, and we were able to sneak in a small solar plant in Ghana. I didn't have to go to the executive leadership team, although that mandate came down from the executive leadership team, but I worked at a much lower level. And the CEO, I don't even think, knew about it till he visited Ghana, and then there's a small solar plant there. So, 2 things. One is that long-term target, but then the third thing is that our stakeholders are asking for renewable energy. ESG, environment, social governance, stakeholders, investors, and analysts call us and ask us, what are your renewable energy targets? Well, that I was shocked to hear that they actually give us a score on our renewable energy. So I think those 3 things.
So it's fascinating. If you think about certainly the cost of providing energy in some of the communities, the social license aspect of it, the environmental aspects of it, but also government policy and how some of those things are changing. Ron, maybe just to come back to you, it seems like you've been involved in a number of different projects. I sense that these things have evolved over time, and maybe you could just comment on what's changed most recently.
I think one key trend that we're seeing is the continuing drop-off in the price for solar and wind. And I think that's, if you're not an environmentalist, I think if you're a capitalist and a financial person, you'll see the benefit of lower cost renewable energy now as opposed to even 5-10 years ago. As you see a doubling in solar installations worldwide, every extra gigawatt to 2 gigawatts, you'll see a drop off in about 18%. Wind is about 16%. So I think the technology change, getting more watts per panel, also improvements in storage. I think that's where we're seeing lithium-ion batteries and other technologies offering the ability to put solar, put wind, which are intermittent and variable to align better with a 24/7 mining operation. I think that's the big turnaround in my mind of aligning those, two different variabilities of, solar, intermittent, and a 24/7 mining operation.
And maybe for the rest of the panel, is that a global phenomenon? Do you see that happening in Ghana, for example?
Ghana for what?
Just in terms of the price digression, in terms of solar and storage technologies becoming more appealing for applications?
It is. Solar just worldwide, the price is dropping tremendously. And, certain regions, it's still very expensive, not for the equipment itself, which is very inexpensive, but for the installation. That's what adds the cost. And so in Ghana, like 3 years ago, we did a study for a pretty big plant, 10 megawatts, and at that time it was marginally economic. Well, you all out there are innovators, and I was here 3 years ago, and I said it's still too expensive, and if we go for a PPA, it's still too long. But you guys are innovating, and now we have mobile systems where decreases the length of the PPA to a reasonable amount, kind of aligned with our life of mine, and also prefabricating a system, loading it up in cargo containers and shipping it to sites so that it decreases installation costs. So we're able to get this system in Ghana for, if you amortize it over 15 years, probably about 6 cents a kilowatt hour, and we pay 13 cents a kilowatt hour for the grid. So yeah, we're seeing it in certain places, but Australia is still high, so we need some innovation there.
Yeah, it is a dramatic change. Benoit, you've been involved in a few different types of technologies, and I guess beyond solar and storage, but also obviously including those, wind, hydrogen I heard mentioned, even I know there's been some talk about small modular reactors, but do you see the technologies evolving in the same way and how that's having an impact on the choices that are available for miners?
Well, where we operate in West Africa, the real solution is solar.
Yeah.
I mean, solar and storage. I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago, we signed a mining agreement in Niger to build a uranium mine. We will start that next year. And the mine needs 20 megawatts, so we will be putting up a 20 megawatt hybrid plant. But the government, in giving us the license, the mining license, has asked that we build a 65 megawatt plant. Because the whole region of Arlit, Agadez, if you're familiar with Niger, where the uranium belt is, it's all dirty coal. It's really bad, and it's a large population. So they've asked us now not to build 25, but 65. So we're going to be putting that into the feasibility study. Of course, we'll do it through the IPP so that we don't want to burden the capex of the mine. Otherwise, the mining group won't be very happy. But by building a 65 megawatt, the main buyer of that energy will be the mine, but the other 45 or 40 megawatt will go to the population. So in our part of the world, we've looked at other sources, and people tell me, what about uranium? Well, nowhere will you see Niger or Burkina Faso be allowed through the international convention to have a uranium power plant. I mean, it's not going to happen for quite a while. So even though there could be a 100 megawatt uranium power plant, it won't be feasible. But solar with batteries, to me, that is the big breakthrough. We're coming out at about 10 cents per kilowatt hour up there, so 10, 12 cents compared to fuel, which is currently running at 33 cents. So, you make your mine much more economical. So it's, to me, the battery part of the equation, which is 2 years old now maybe, is the big breakthrough.
And same experience with everybody else? You've seen that tipping point over the last 2 years?
I would say more or less. I mean, Mexico is really driving to get more renewable energy, the Mexican government, certainly.
So what about some of the barriers? It sounds like there's been this massive, or at least transformation over the last little while. I certainly remember, a couple of years ago where, there was that same kind of experience where it was more heavily weighted perhaps towards more social license or government policy, but now the economics seem to be there. But what are the barriers? Maybe Ralph, you want to comment on that?
Well, barriers, for sure, are storage. If we could find some really good solutions for power storage, this would transform many, many mines to renewables. That's probably the biggest one that I could see.
Everybody's nodding their heads, Ron?
I would agree. I think that's probably the 800-pound gorilla in the room. How do you transform solar, which the utility in Colorado, Xcel Energy, they received bids for 21 to $36 a megawatt hour for renewable energy just this last April. So, that's not the same price you'll find in Australia, other locations, but the trend is lower and lower prices for renewable energy. But in order to access that critical link of energy storage, and there are different technologies out there that I think you can employ, but I also think that it's critical for energy practitioners to communicate not only the cost structure, but also the reliability with, energy production and storage to management. I think keep ringing that bell that there are other alternatives, other technologies to diesel or coal for powering our mines. I think that's a real key element in communicating and bringing up the new technologies that we can access, so people are aware we do have alternatives.
So I want to stay on that theme for a second, maybe go across the panel, because I think that there's a good number of people in the audience that are quite interested in what the perspective of miners are in terms of looking at alternative technologies, renewable technologies. And maybe we'll start, what advice or what would you say to people looking to get into the area in terms of what you would typically be looking at in some of these projects?
So I think what we need is, we have a lot of self-generation. So our designers always go to like diesel gensets. And so we have to break that mindset. And again, I'm talking to you because you guys are doing it, where in the upfront capital costs for like a wind system or a solar system, and by offering us like a hybrid system, I think that's really important, that if we give you our credit rating, you can get the funding to build a plant, and so it's a collaboration, and that seems to be really working. I think we have opportunity there, but again, it's breaking our mindset and to be able to do that. So I think it's a real partnership between what you offer and what we need. And again, in the last 3 years since I've been here last time, things have changed greatly, and we already have one solar plant, and we're looking at building more. And not just solar, and I just want to slip this in, it's not just solar and wind, but we really need biofuels, because as Ron said, the largest source of our GHG emissions is diesel fuel. So, you can't run a truck on solar or wind, so we need to get more biodiesel into the system as well.
Ralph, what would you say to folks?
Well, from our perspective, we're a small company, and building a mine and just acquired a mine and running that mine, it's really capital cost. Can we tap into the money to actually fund these systems? And that's the difficult part of it. It's a tough road for a little junior company like ours, especially in this current environment for companies, and especially small public companies. The markets have been terrible for us and haven't really supported us. The investment bankers are all focused on other things, and so it's been a tough road to really go hard into renewables, because the capital costs just kind of tear you apart. So we've been successful in getting the power generation supplier in the Mexican grids. We're buying power from solar energy. And the Tabahueto project, which we're building, it's simply going to gas in order to save some money, but also to cut down on the potential theft of fuel from the local people, which is always a problem in remote areas in Mexico. So, I think that's probably our biggest challenge, is the capital cost to a lot of these solar equipment and storage for the energy.
Benoit, maybe you come from an interesting view, because you're on the mining side, but you also are involved in an IPP. What are your perspectives on what people can bring to the table that would be most valuable for you?
Patience. It's, patience is people don't realize that when you bring in alternative energy, you break the financial culture of many countries. Because fuel, diesel, trucking, import, selling, collecting, it's thousands of jobs. We had the problem. We have a project in Burkina Faso where we're selling them energy at 1/3 of their price. And it's been 8 years, and that's to the grid, not to the mine, but to the grid. And the problem is it's disruptive. And we've been fighting, but all these countries, I won't say they're all structured like France, but the import is through a privately held company, and they bring in all the fuel in country. There's 2, 3, 4, 5 cents per liter that goes somewhere, which we don't know where, but it goes somewhere. And then there's the trucking, and then there's distribution, and then there's warehousing. And that is a real issue. I mean, we may be thinking about the technical problem, but that's a problem because it creates an issue. And so when you say, okay, I'm building 25 megawatt of solar, well, if you do the math, it's a lot of millions of dollars of revenue for somebody down the line. So this is a problem. But I think the solution we have now with energy and with solar and batteries, and I think what Mike said, biofuel to me is the next sequence. That's what we need to do. We need to use biofuel in our trucks, in the gen sets that we're going to be using when the solar or the wind is down. And if we can have a reliable source of biofuel, then we would be clean. We're building a graphite mine at the moment in Guinea for graphite for batteries, for EVs, and we're looking at going 100% clean because Volkswagen is asking and Mercedes, they don't want another Dieselgate, so they want to know where is the graphite coming from, where's the cobalt coming from. So we're trying to go all the way 100% renewable, and the biofuel is kind of the problem because there's not enough out there for the trucks but that to me is the next step. Anybody who can come up with enough biofuel, we're all buyers.
Mm-hmm. We have about another 15 minutes, I believe, left, and so I don't see any microphones. I think Adrian has a microphone. There might be others out there. If anybody has any questions, the lights aren't too bad. Maybe in the front row I see two, perhaps gentleman right in front of me with a loud, bombastic voice.
Microphone?
Or the other.
Okay. I have a question for the panel, and that is that the options for installing a clean energy solution, we talk about the CapEx. Generally, what's the view between going EPC with a contractor and for the mine to own the asset versus IPP solution? What's the general view on that?
For me, that's a very good question, and that's a very easy question because we need to reduce the CapEx of our mines. Mines have had a very bad track record historically. Very few in Burkina. We built 12 mines, not me, but the industry, and 10 of them went bankrupt throughout construction. So it's a very difficult business. So we need to reduce the CapEx. So the IPP solution, if we can sign a long enough PPA, that's the problem, is a lot of gold mines have an 8-year mine life. We all know they go to 12 or 15, but they have an 8-year mine life. On the graphite, we have a 30-year mine life with 1/3 of the deposit. So that's an easy one. So we'll sign a 25-year PPA, and then the capital needs to be off the balance sheet of the mining company, because it's very, as you indicated, right now everybody's in cannabis, nobody's in mining, and it's very, very difficult. And I'm not kidding you. I mean, it's true. I mean, us miners, we used to call a banker and we'd get a term sheet. Now, when you're a mining company and you call a banker, they call the police. I mean, it's very, very difficult. So we absolutely need to take the CapEx out of the mining and go with the IPP. And there's lots of IPPs who have funding from, DFIs in developing countries, and you can get 5-6% rates of interest. So your PPA is not affected that much, and it's a competitive rate.
Yeah,
Ron?
To build on Benoit's comment, I think it's a real opportune time in the mining and energy business. For one, you have companies that build solar, wind, power plants, energy storage. That is their mainstream business. They're very talented, and they've got their costs way down. You've got a long-term, whether it be 8 years or 30 years for a PPA, that a company, an IPP, can build a plant, be assured of getting paid for their solar facility over that period of time. And the third leg to the stool is historically low interest rates, that capital is looking for alternatives, investing in a 10, 20-year solar project with a high credit rating company. That's got to be golden to a banker or an investment company wanting to support a renewable energy project. So I think it's an opportune time for all three of those reasons.
Yes.
My name is Raziel Zisman. I'm with Whittle Consulting. I want to make 2 points on paradigm shifts. Number one, I'm also on the board of the PDAC. Mining companies, should they go alone to a remote area and do everything? Benoit mentioned the point that the government is asking for 65 megawatt power station. What happens if we look at it in a different way? As pioneers in transforming a region, for example, we talk about biodiesel. Should we come in with an agribusiness company that is going to actually plant the material and generate the biodiesel in the long term? The other point is I not necessarily agree with Benoit on the CapEx. If you incorporate the plant in the life of mine, you may be able to lower the cut-off grade of the mine and increase the resource. So that's a different way of looking at the challenge of renewable energy. And these are two items that I want to bring up.
Thank you. Let me answer your second question. By reducing the cost of the energy, you automatically increase your mine life. So you don't need to have the capex on your own balance. You can, if you're Rio Tinto, they have access to capital and Newmont, but us smaller guys, where we need to call the bankers downtown here in Toronto, it's a lot more difficult. But you're right. If you have the capital and you'll have an internal rate of return on leverage of your project of maybe 6, 7, 8% on energy, they may decide that that's satisfactory and they'll take it. But for smaller guys where the cost of capital is expensive on mining, because the private equity funds are looking for 20 to 25% return, so you don't get that with your capex on your energy. So you may as well give it out and then do it. So that's why, depending who you're talking to, you may keep or not keep the capex on your energy plan. On agriculture, we have created an agriculture division in our group. We have 6 mining companies. We have 1 IPP, and now we have 1 agriculture company. Why? Because when we sit down with the presidents in the African countries, they talk to you about mining for 5 minutes, because here's the project, here's what we're going to do. We're starting construction. Energy, we're going to do that. That's 15 minutes. And then how about my people? And you need to feed them, you need to find work, and look at what's happening right now. I read last night, like Randgold has now stopped in Mali at Lulo. It's half of their production. Us at SEMAFO, 2 weeks ago at our Mana mine, we had to stop because the populations were coming into the site. And it's everywhere. In Mexico, it's happening now everywhere. And why? Because you need to keep the people around you busy. And the best way is not with solar or wind, it's with agriculture. So we need to have an agriculture strategy as part of our CSR and our energy strategy, because the license to operate is getting very, very difficult to obtain. And to me, agriculture is the way to go. So yeah, you grow a plant that you can use as biofuel, which is fantastic. Everybody is working, everybody's happy, and you use that to power the plant, and we're looking at that at the moment in Guinea on our graphite mine. And you're absolutely right. But mining was difficult. It's getting more and more difficult right now due to all social media. And I don't want to. But if you look at what's happening in France, and I'm no comment on les cartons jaunes, but what's happening in France is happening in the mining space. Is with social media. You have 10,000 people around your mine one morning. And it's very fast and it's very scary. So we need to be on top, because in Guinea, where we are building the mine, there was another mine there, and their power plant stopped. And the population said, well, you're cutting down the energy. And they said, yeah, we ran out of fuel. I'm sorry, the road's bad. So the population came, and to get even with the mining company, they burned down the power plant. So now there's no oil coming in, but there's no more power.
Yeah.
So, and that you can control that. So it's a long answer, but agriculture to me is the only way to go, because it's the only way you're going to create thousands of jobs, making sure they work, they can go to school, and they have education and healthcare.
We have a few minutes left, and I'm going to continue to scan the room for any hands. But before, I'll get to you in a quick moment. But I don't want to lose that concept of social license and local communities and what you give back. Kind of going back to where I started in terms of looking at Canadian projects and indigenous communities, and I've heard different things about working in Mexico, working in Africa and whatnot. But how important is that, maybe tied specifically to renewable energy, partnerships, equity, relationships with local communities or indigenous groups? Is that something that you're seeing as a dynamic? Mike, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that because that is so important to us. So when we look at renewable energy or even energy in general, we engage with the community. So we'll buy a capital project for maybe up to 1 megawatt of solar, but post-closure, I say we have a pretty short life of mine, maybe 10, 15 years. We want to give that solar plant to the community. So that is part of us. And then the other thing is we work with governments. Like in Ghana, we did this Ghana power study a few years ago, and actually Ron was part of that. And we had an opportunity to do an IPP or self-generate, but we chose to go with the VRA, which is the Volta River Authority in Ghana, and Gridco, because we need their support and they needed our money, because the problem in Ghana was people don't pay their utility bills. So we chose that, even though the other options were cheaper, we chose to invest in the country.
Mm-hmm.
It's crucial, absolutely crucial. In Mexico, as someone had mentioned, there's difficulties with local people shutting down mines. If you don't embrace the community and make them part of your operation, you don't operate. It's very, very difficult. In Tawaweto, our remote site, the power plant we'll be building will be providing power to some of the local community at a very, very reduced rate. Or free, just to keep this community on side with the operations. So it's absolutely crucial.
Ron?
One thing, in fact, I was just over in Australia last 3 weeks, and the Ranger uranium mine, we're evaluating a 1 megawatt solar that would be there for the longer term for the Aboriginal people in that area that actually own the land that the mine is sited on. So I think the privilege to operate is really key, not just for now, but I think stakeholders, whether they be investors or governments, they're watching everything that mining companies do, because what you've done in the past is a good harbinger of what you will do in the future. And I think they're watching us, whether we think they are or not. We are on their radar range, so it's never wrong to do the right thing.
Yeah, well put. Please.
Hi, Andrew Wilson. I'm with Detour Gold. I'm curious to know a little bit of the panel's opinions on sort of the material handling types of problems, because, in terms of the renewable technology we have, there's a lot of good options on the table to handle the electrical generation, cogen heat and those sorts of things. But, as we've also described, the big challenge is our trucks run on diesel, and other than supplementing with some biofuel content, are we really, as an industry, investing in challenging that sort of conventional design choice enough? Should we be doing more, and is that a responsibility on suppliers and vendors, or should it be more government industry partnership to help move some of those technologies forward?
I'll take that one. I think 2 points. One, diesel engine technology, improving efficiencies, throughput, efficiency of for our haul trucks and other trucks that are used on site. But I think the longer term, the green mine of the future, we ought to be looking at electrifying trucks. I think it's getting far out in the future. I think that future is coming closer and closer, and especially as we have a real focus on diesel emissions, looking at how do we operate our mine, just like Kim was saying, do we need trucks? Well, maybe the intermediary step is how do we reduce our environmental impact and our cost impact of diesel fuel trucks? It's not as applicable in every location, but I think that's an area where the industry itself can really look at some big structural changes in both costs, consumption, and emissions.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that question also. So right now we have about 18% of our gold comes from underground operations, and by 2040 it's going to be like 44%. So we are looking at electrification of underground vehicles, autonomous vehicles. But that's a longer term thing. So in the short term, the haul trucks, we're looking at improving fuel efficiency, and we're working with a small company in Colorado who has actual lab tests of improving diesel engine fuel efficiency by 30%. So we think that's a short-term opportunity that we're really looking at, and it not only improves the fuel efficiency, but it solves some of our other problems like NOx emissions and particulate emissions, which you get a more complete burn, so less particulate emission production.
And maybe I'll just end on a question about government, because we've talked about government a little bit, and certainly the presentation earlier looking at the effects of carbon pricing on mining is not insignificant. And I think carbon pricing can be catalytic in a number of different ways. But how might governments help? We've talked about CapEx, we've talked about different policies enabling certain types of technologies. Maybe any comments about things that governments can do that are particularly useful or helpful, recognizing that all four of you are operating in different geographic markets. So I assume it's a little bit different as you go across around the world. But Benoit, maybe?
Well, I think governments never help. They don't help. You need to help them, not them helping you. It's the government will react to the population. If the population decide they don't want you because you are not green, you're doing certain things, they'll just reflect. There'll be a barrier, but they'll come to you. So we need to go to them and say to them, this is what we're going to do so that you can take this over and make sure the populations are happy. I think there's a massive movement coming from population at the moment, and they don't know what to do. And look in France, they can't get, in Guyana, they can't get the mine permitted, not because they don't need the jobs, there's no jobs. They just can't get it done because the population don't want the mine. So you need to turn this around, and seriously, I mean, I don't see governments helping at all. I mean, rarely anyway. It's really us. That's why we came with the agriculture thinking. 8 years ago, we came with the IPP thinking. And you need to give them tools so that they can control their populations. They're all getting younger. They're smarter, the populations. They're connected. They can read. They know the news. We have a drill hole in Mauritania at our gold mine that hits like 2 kilograms per ton of gold, and the next morning after the press release, there's artisanal miner right on the drill hole. That tells you how connected they are. So you need to be really helping them because they're just defenseless, and it's getting very difficult. But if we can help them, we will help ourselves.
Right, Ron?
I think anything you incent, you get a lot of. And I think for our relationship with government, our privilege to operate in a country, if you want more renewable energy, just as you have production tax credits, investment tax credits, ways that you can incent, the government can incent mining companies to get more and more renewable energy in the energy mix. And also just to make it a cleaner environment, to reduce some of the emissions that are inherent in our current mining process. So I think good government relations, working with government, more like a public-private partnership rather than us versus them. I think changing that dynamic to be one of working together. How can we help each other rather than you're out to get me and I don't like it type of attitude on both sides of the table. So I think more collaborative rather than confrontational.
Right. Ralph, you would agree?
I would certainly agree. I would also say that a big company like Rio or Newmont may have some influence over government. A little Telson will have none. I do believe that the governments are actually promoting and helping out the energy sector, the clean energy sector. But are they helping mining? I mean, I totally agree. They're not helping mining at all.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah, Mike, your perspective?
So I would say it's kind of mixed. We like renewable portfolio standards, at least as a sustainability group we do, and because that drives us to put more renewables out there. But there are some obstacles that they create. Is like in the U.S. they have a benefit for wind power which solar doesn't get. So these wind plants can actually offer a negative price on the open market, which totally distorts everything because we want to do a virtual power purchase agreement, and that just adds a lot of risk when these wind plants can, price their power at negative rates. So it's mixed, but overall we also like the Paris Agreement, and that will filter down through the government, and we will try to work with the governments to make it favorable to mining.
I'd like to thank the panel very much for your participation. I think it's a great way to start off the day. Audience, thank you very much for your attention. I'll pass it back over to Adrian. Thank you.